In the mid-1800s, America's insatiable appetite for coal as the primary energy source and the need for timber and steel for construction for national expansion caused a desperate need to transport these resources in bulk along the East Coast. Many of these carriers were initially three-masted sailing schooners and square-rigged vessels. Some refer to this period as the Golden Age of Sail, due to the popularity and efficiency of these sailing ships. Hundreds of shipyards had sprung up all over America's coastline, with most along the rugged New England coast. Some coal-fired vessels, like steamships or steamers, were less reliant on the trade winds than their sailing counterparts. They were also dependable in delivering cargo on time. However, the early steamships did not have the range needed for extended voyages. They required more sailors to run the ship, and many could not carry as much cargo as larger sailing ships. Early merchant or cargo ships used the square-rigged sail design, where wooden horizontal spars carried most of the primary sails perpendicular to the masts. They were slower than schooners and needed large crews of at least 30 men to climb up in the rigging to raise and lower the sails and maintain the ship. With their triangular and angular four-sided sails, schooners proved to be the favored design for hauling coal over the previous square riggers. These coal schooners, or colliers as they were called, were explicitly designed as bulk cargo ships to carry large quantities of coal in one trip. Their unique sail design gave these vessels unlimited range as they relied only on sail propulsion, although they depended on weather conditions. They were faster in deep open waters and were relatively inexpensive to operate, as they could be handled by smaller crews, saving ship owners money on hiring sailors. Transporting more significant quantities of cargo over long distances encouraged shipbuilders to begin designing and building larger sailing ships. As a result, larger four-masted and five-masted schooners were developed between the 1880s and the early years of the 20th century to carry large quantities of coal, steel, and timber. In 1894, the Percy Small Shipyard started building wooden ships in Bath, Maine. After surviving the economic depression, it became the epicenter of wooden commercial shipbuilding on the northern East Coast. The shipyard specialized in building large wooden sailing schooners called downeasters to haul coal primarily from the mid-Atlantic states through New England into Canada. Four- and five-masted schooners could carry 3,000 to 4,400 tons of cargo. However, with the new economy booming, the race was on among shipbuilders to effectively design larger six-masted schooners to transport even more coal and construction materials to increase profits, with capacities of delivering between 5,000 to 6,000 tons. The creation of these giants became a reality between 1900 to 1909. The first of these largest vessels was the George W. Wells, constructed in 1900 at the Holly M. Bean Shipyard in Camden, Maine, under the direction of Captain Crowley, who wanted the notoriety of being the first to launch a six-masted vessel. From 1900 to 1909, Maine shipyards produced 9 of the 10 original six-masted giants that would be built, with 7 at the Percy Small Shipyard and 2 further up the Maine coast. In Quincy, Massachusetts, the Four River Ship and Engine Company built one of steel named the William L. Douglas. One of the prominent financial investors in some of the six-masted schooners built in Maine was Edward Jones Lawrence. He owned cotton and textile mills in Waterville, Maine, and depended on coal for his businesses. He had 3 six-masted ships built in his last name, 2 named after his daughters Addie and Alice, and the last one in his name, constructed in 1908. The six-masted schooner Edward J. Lawrence was launched at Percy Small on April 2nd, 1908, with William Crager, an early shipmaster for the schooner under J.S. Winslow ownership. She was the 4th largest schooner built by Percy Small, as ranked by gross tonnage after Wyoming, the largest wooden ship ever built, Edward B. Winslow, launched the same year as Edward J. Lawrence, and Eleanor A. Percy. She had a gross tonnage of 350, was 320.2 feet long, 50 feet beam, and 23.9 feet deep. The schooner was lighted with electricity and has a complete telephone equipment. Percy Small equipped the schooners it built with steam-powered donkey engines with a hide windlass machine that helped hoist and lower the sails and anchors and lift heavy equipment. With this early automation, these schooners could sail with their heavy cargo with relatively small crews on board, lowering the cost of daily operations. On June 16, 1909, Edward J. Lawrence went aground at Cross Rip Shoals off Nantucket, while en route to Portland with coal loaded at Norfolk, Virginia, but floated free afterward with the assistance of a tugboat. During Crager's tenure, she went aground on 2 other occasions without significant damage and struck a ledge in another incident. On October 13, 1913, the ship sailed through a nor'easter off Cape Cod, taking on 7 feet of water in her hold and listing during the storm, then dropping anchor to ride out the worst of it. 3 months later, in January 1914, Edward J. Lawrence again sailed through a major storm that claimed Grace A. Martin and Fuller Palmer, 2 other Percy and Small-built schooners. The combined effect of the storms and groundings of Edward J. Lawrence is thought to have produced hogging in the hull that compromised the ship's seaworthiness. As the case with other 6-masted schooners built in Maine, Edward J. Lawrence saw limited service during World War I, with transatlantic voyages carrying military or supply cargoes. Under a new shipmaster named Frank H. Peterson, Edward J. Lawrence again dodged disaster after delivering a load of artillery shell casings to the port of La Pallice, France. Departing port alongside another Percy and Small-built schooner called Carl F. Cressy, the 2 ships sailed southwest, initially under the watch of French gunboats, which eventually turned back to the Bay of Biscay. With a radio on board Edward J. Lawrence, Peterson received a nighttime alert of a U-boat operating some 60 miles distant on the course the ships were sailing. Peterson set a new tack to the northeast, but with Carl F. Cressy lacking a radio, was unable to warn his counterpart. Carl F. Cressy was sunk by SMU-93 the following day on August 23, 1917. On an unknown date, South Portland native and shipmaster Joseph H. York was installed as shipmaster of Edward J. Lawrence. York was captain of the George W. Wells, the first 6-masted schooner built on the East Coast, and Thomas W. Lawson, the only 7-masted schooner ever built, which had a steel hull. In 1925, Edward J. Lawrence remained in Portland Harbor during a contractual dispute over a tugboat company's claim for non-payment of invoices owed, with U.S. Marshals ultimately impounding the vessel with the intent to auction it for the benefit of the claimants. About 11 a.m. on December 26, 1925, a fire broke out on board, with an illegal liquor still thought to have been the cause of the blaze. The South Portland Historical Society has a newspaper clipping in its archives with a photograph captioned, "Battling to Save the Edward J. Lawrence," by an unspecified publisher, that shows 3 vessels alongside the burning schooner during the attempt to extinguish the fire: an unidentified fireboat, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter UASUPPLY, and the steam tugboat Cumberland. A Boston Globe correspondent reported the decision to beach Edward J. Lawrence on a reef off Fort Gorges in Portland Harbor, and described the fire as the most spectacular for years, with the 320-foot length of the ship and her masts fringed with flame. Thousands of onlookers watched the fire and efforts to extinguish it, according to the report. By then, Edward J. Lawrence was the last survivor of 10 6-masted schooners built between 1900 and 1909.